Alfredo had been a park ranger at Whispering Pines National Park for over 15 years. It was a remote and dense forest, sprawling across acres of untouched wilderness. Visitors were rare, mostly adventurous hikers or nature enthusiasts who preferred solitude. Alfredo loved the tranquility and the symphony of the woods. The sounds of rustling leaves and chirping birds were like a soothing balm to his soul. But lately, the forest seemed to be hiding something sinister. It started with the disappearance of a young couple, the Millers, who had come for a weekend getaway. Their car was found abandoned at the edge of the forest, their campsite intact, but there was no sign of them. Alfredo led the search team, scouring the woods for days, but they found nothing. It was as if the couple had vanished into thin air. Weeks passed, and the forest seemed to grow darker, more oppressive. Alfredo noticed the silence first. The usual sounds of wildlife were absent, replaced by an eerie stillness. It felt as though the forest was holding its breath, waiting. One evening, Alfredo was making his rounds when he stumbled upon a small, abandoned cabin deep within the forest. It was odd. He had never seen it before in all his years patrolling the area. The cabin was old, its wood weathered and rotting. Curiosity piqued. He decided to take a look inside. The door creaked loudly as he pushed it open, revealing a single room filled with dust and cobwebs. A faded photograph on the mantel caught his eye. It was a picture of a family, a man, a woman, and a little girl. Something about the picture sent a shiver down his spine. He turned to leave when he heard it, a faint whisper, barely audible. "Help us." Alfredo spun around, his heart pounding in his chest. The room was empty, but the whispering continued, growing louder, more urgent. He stumbled back out into the forest, the whispering following him, echoing in his mind. He tried to convince himself it was just the wind, but deep down he knew better. That night, Alfredo couldn't sleep. The whispers haunted him, their desperate pleas filling his ears. He decided to return to the cabin the next day, determined to uncover the truth. As he approached the cabin the following morning, he noticed something he hadn't seen before, a narrow path leading deeper into the woods. The path was overgrown and barely visible, as if it hadn't been used in years. With a sense of foreboding, he followed it. The path wound through the trees, twisting and turning until it led into a clearing. In the center of the clearing was a massive oak tree, its branches gnarled and twisted. Beneath the tree, partially covered by leaves and dirt, was a small weathered chest. Alfredo knelt down and pried the chest open. Inside, he found old letters and photographs, all belonging to the family in the picture. There were also newspaper clippings about the family's disappearance years ago. As he read through the letters, the whispers returned, clearer this time. "They took us. Don't let them. Find the truth." The final letter was a frantic plea for help, written by the father. He spoke of strange occurrences, of being watched, and of the forest coming alive with malevolent intent. He mentioned a secret they had uncovered, something that someone didn't want them to reveal. Suddenly, Alfredo felt a presence behind him. He turned to see a figure standing at the edge of the clearing. It was a man, tall and gaunt, with hollow eyes and a menacing smile. "You should have left it alone," the man said, his voice a low growl. "Now it's too late." Before Alfredo could react, the man lunged at him. He fought back, but the man's strength was inhuman. They struggled, and Alfredo was knocked to the ground, his vision fading as he heard the whispers one last time. "Save us." When Alfredo awoke, he was back at the ranger station, a splitting headache blurring his vision. The chest and its contents were gone, as if they had never existed. The forest outside his window seemed darker, more foreboding. He knew the secret of Whispering Pines was far from uncovered, and the whispers would haunt him until he could find a way to set the spirits free. But for now, the forest held its secrets tightly, and Alfredo was left to wonder if he would ever escape its grasp. Days turned into weeks, and Alfredo found himself unable to escape the oppressive weight of Whispering Pines. The whispers grew louder each night, depriving him of sleep and eroding his sanity. The few visitors who ventured into the park noticed his haggard appearance and restless demeanor, but Alfredo brushed off their concerns, unable to share the haunting reality he faced. Determined to uncover the truth, Alfredo began to meticulously comb through old park records, hoping to find any clue about the mysterious family and their connection to the forest. One late evening, buried deep within the archives, he stumbled upon an old map. It was dated over 50 years ago and marked with a red X, right where the abandoned cabin stood. Alfredo's heart raced. This map had to hold the key. He followed the map's directions, which led him beyond the cabin and into an even more remote part of the forest. As he ventured deeper, The forest seemed to close in around him, the trees whispering dark secrets in his ear. Finally, he arrived at the marked spot. There, hidden beneath layers of moss and leaves, was a stone altar, its surface etched with symbols that sent chills down his spine. Surrounding the altar were the skeletal remains of animals, and he realized with horror, humans. As Alfredo stood frozen, a sudden realization washed over him. The forest wasn't just alive, it was feeding. The family, the Millers, and perhaps others had fallen victim to an ancient, malevolent force. The whispers weren't merely cries for help, they were warnings. A rustling sound behind him made him turn. The gaunt man from the clearing emerged from the shadows, his eyes glowing with a supernatural light. "You shouldn't have come back," he hissed. "The forest demands sacrifices, and now it will have you." Alfredo backed away, his mind racing for a way out. He remembered the letters, the desperate plea from the father about finding the truth. What was the secret they uncovered? With a sudden burst of clarity, Alfredo realized the answer lay within the symbols on the altar. They weren't just random carvings, they were part of a ritual. If he could disrupt the ritual, maybe he could break the forest's hold. As the man advanced, Alfredo grabbed a nearby branch and used it to scratch through the symbols on the altar, defacing the ancient markings. The man screamed, a sound that echoed through the trees, causing the forest to shudder. The whispers grew deafening, a cacophony of voices merging into a single, desperate wail. The ground beneath Alfredo's feet trembled, and he felt the air grow thick with tension. But he continued, determined to end the cycle. Suddenly, the gaunt man lunged at him, but Alfredo was ready. He swung the branch, striking the man's head. The man staggered, and Alfredo took the opportunity to scratch through the final symbol. As he did, a blinding light erupted from the altar, engulfing the clearing in a brilliant searing glow. When the light faded, Alfredo found himself alone. The whispers were gone, replaced by the gentle rustle of leaves and the distant call of birds. The oppressive weight had lifted, and the forest seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. Exhausted but relieved, Alfredo made his way back to the ranger station. He knew the forest's dark secret was finally laid to rest, but the cost had been high. As he sat down, he realized he still had one final task: to ensure the story of the Whispering Pines was told, so that no one else would fall victim to its dark history. In the days that followed, Alfredo wrote detailed reports, including everything he had uncovered. He shared his findings with authorities, who were skeptical but agreed to investigate. Whispering Pines was closed to the public, and the cabin, altar, and surrounding areas were marked as restricted. Years later, Alfredo retired, moving far away from the forest that had both haunted and defined him. Though the whispers had ceased, the memories lingered. He knew he had saved future visitors from a dark fate, but the spirits of those lost would forever remain a part of them. And in the quiet moments, when the wind rustled through the trees outside his new home, Alfredo sometimes thought he could still hear the faintest whisper of gratitude. Robert had always loved the tranquility of the woods. After serving in the military for 15 years, he had decided to retire to a quieter life as a park ranger. He found solace in the silence of nature, the rustling leaves, the distant calls of wildlife. The Great Bear National Park was his sanctuary. He had been working there for 2 years, maintaining trails, assisting lost hikers, and ensuring the park remained pristine. One summer evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows through the dense canopy, Robert received a radio call from the visitor center. A group of campers had reported strange noises coming from the northern sector of the park, an area rarely visited due to its rugged terrain and thick underbrush. Sounds like an animal, but they're freaked out, came the voice of Jenna, the receptionist at the visitor center. Robert grabbed his flashlight and radio, then headed towards the northern trails. The path was barely visible under the thickening twilight, but Robert knew the park like the back of his hand. As he walked, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, a sense of unease that seemed to grow with each step. The first sign of trouble was a guttural, almost human-like scream that echoed through the trees. Robert's heart pounded in his chest. He quickened his pace, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. After about 20 minutes of navigating the treacherous trail, he came upon a small clearing. In the center, there was a circle of stones with remnants of a recent fire. Around it, the ground was disturbed, as if a struggle had taken place. "Is anyone there?" Robert called out, his voice swallowed by the oppressive silence. He waited, straining to hear any response. After a few moments, he moved closer to the fire pit. The ashes were still warm, and among them, he found a torn piece of fabric stained with blood. Robert's radio crackled to life. "Robert, any update? The campers are really spooked. They said they heard those noises last night too. Just found a campsite. Looks like something happened here. I'll keep you posted," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. As he continued to search the area, he found more signs of a struggle. Broken branches, trampled undergrowth, and more blood. His mind raced with possibilities, none of them comforting. He decided to follow the trail of blood, hoping it would lead him to the source of the disturbance. The trail led deeper into the forest, to a part of the park that even Robert rarely ventured into. The trees grew thicker here, their gnarled branches intertwining to form a nearly impenetrable canopy. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. Robert's flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows that danced in the periphery of his vision. Suddenly, he stumbled upon something that made his blood run cold. A crude, makeshift shelter made of branches and leaves stood hidden among the trees. Inside, he found more blood and signs of a recent struggle. There were also strange symbols carved into the wooden supports of the shelter, symbols that sent a shiver down his spine. He heard a rustling behind him and spun around, his flashlight beam slicing through the darkness. For a brief moment, he thought he saw a figure dart between the trees. "Hello, show yourself?" he called, but only silence answered. Robert's radio crackled again. "Robert, we're getting more reports of strange noises. Be careful out there." "I think I found something. There's a makeshift shelter out here, and it doesn't look friendly. I'm going to investigate further." "Copy that. Stay safe." Robert took a deep breath and continued his search. He found a trail leading away from the shelter and followed it until he came to a small, hidden clearing. In the center of the clearing was a large, ancient oak tree. Its twisted branches seemed to reach out like skeletal fingers. As Robert approached, he saw something that made his stomach churn. Tied to the tree was a man, his face contorted in terror. His clothes were torn, and he was covered in blood. Robert rushed over, but it was too late. The man was dead. As he stood there, staring at the lifeless body, Robert felt a chill run down his spine. He wasn't alone. He turned around slowly, his flashlight illuminating the dense underbrush. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming now. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was a man, tall and gaunt, with wild eyes and a crazed expression. He was holding a knife, its blade glinting in the flashlight beam. "Who are you?" Robert demanded, his voice shaking. The man grinned, a twisted, malevolent smile. "I'm the guardian of the forest," he said, his voice a raspy whisper. "And you're trespassing." Robert's mind raced. He had to get out of there, but the man was blocking his only escape route. He took a step back, trying to think of a plan. "Why did you kill him?" Robert asked, trying to keep the man talking. "He was defiling the forest," the man replied, his eyes glinting with madness. "Just like you." Robert's radio crackled to life again, but he didn't dare take his eyes off the man. "Robert, are you there? We need an update." "I'm here," Robert said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm in trouble. There's a man here, and he's dangerous." The man lunged at him, and Robert barely had time to react. He dodged to the side, the knife slicing through the air where he had just been standing. He swung his flashlight at the man's head, hoping to disorient him. The man stumbled, but recovered quickly. Robert knew he had to act fast. He grabbed a large branch from the ground and swung it at the man, hitting him in the side. The man let out a grunt of pain and fell to the ground. Robert didn't wait to see if he was going to get back up. He turned and ran, his heart pounding in his chest. He could hear the man behind him, getting to his feet and giving chase. The forest was a blur as Robert sprinted through the underbrush. He didn't know where he was going, only that he had to get away. He could hear the man's footsteps behind him, getting closer and closer. Robert burst out of the trees and onto a familiar trail. He could see the lights of the visitor center in the distance. He ran towards them, his legs burning with effort. As he reached the visitor center, he saw Jenna standing outside, her face pale with worry. "Robert, what happened?" "Call the police," he gasped. "There's a man in the woods. He's dangerous." Jenna hurried inside to make the call, while Robert leaned against the building, trying to catch his breath. He could still hear the man's crazed laughter echoing through the trees. The police arrived quickly, and Robert led them back to the clearing. The man was gone, but they found the makeshift shelter and the body of the dead camper. The symbols carved into the wood sent chills down everyone's spine. As they searched the area, they found more evidence of the man's presence: old campsites, crude tools, and disturbing drawings. It was clear that he had been living in the park for a long time, hiding in the shadows, preying on unsuspecting campers. The police launched a manhunt, but the man was never found. The park was closed for weeks as they searched, but eventually it reopened. Robert returned to his duties, but he was never the same. The peace he had once found in the forest was gone, replaced by a lingering sense of dread. Every time he walked the trails, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. And sometimes, late at night, he could still hear the man's laughter, echoing through the trees.